When you are on a cruise ship and the captain needs to change directions, it is not easy to steer the ship another direction. But when you're on a small little yacht, you can do laps around a cruise ship and pivot whenever you want. The size of the ship matters when you make decisions and when you need to pivot. This is also true in business. Smaller companies have the opportunity to pivot when they are small and young versus when a company is more established and has a bigger customer base.
We were so young when we did it, right? It was so early on. We didn't have that big of an audience just yet. So for us, when we were able to pivot, it was just a small wave, right? Like I feel like if other companies at different sizes, like if some of our competitors were to make this pivot, I feel like that would be a huge undertaking, right? But because we were so young when we made the pivot, for us, it was almost it was just almost like, hey, this is where we should have always been.
A few years into Maria Juan's time with Peerfit, they had to pivot their whole brand from direct to consumer to business to business. Through this rebrand and shifting of position, Peerfit exploded in their success as an app and service. You are listening to How to Build an Audience, the podcast that tells the stories of how some of the top entrepreneurs, marketers, and communicators built a following around their businesses and brands. I'm your host, Matthew Gutozzi. Today I'm talking with Maria Juan. Maria is the VP of Marketing of Peerfit, which is redefining the corporate wellness space. Peerfit is on a mission to get employers to pay for employees' exercise and health benefits. Peerfit makes it easy for each employee to book whatever exercise class they want in town. With hundreds of thousands of users, Maria has led marketing campaigns that have led to massive success. Before Maria's success as a marketer, she started as a dancer.
My journey was I felt like it was unique to me, but now I'm finding more and more that I'm seeing lots of artists, especially performing artists, are getting into marketing. So I started my career as a performing artist. I have a dance degree, right, from the University of South Florida in Tampa. And so I was just trying to find ways to fund my dance passion, right? And I was like, dance doesn't pay. So what does pay that I still would also really love to learn and do? And that was marketing. I really enjoyed marketing for the different organizations that I was actually dancing for. And I would use that as a way to not only just help out other emerging arts organizations or other dance companies, but I also use it as a way to kind of get my foot in the door on a dance role too as well. And so it was just a really great find for me, and just another passion that I was able to fall into. And I kind of did it to support my dance career at the same time. And then when I was ready to just make a transition, I realized, hey, I think I could do this full time, while I'm taking a little hiatus from the dance world. So it's been just a really great find. And I feel like marketing has a lot of attributes that performing artists need to have as well. It's very creative, but also analytical. And I think it was a really great career move for me to fall into this.
I love that because obviously we were talking about this before. I was a professional dancer, so I always love meeting other dancers. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have enough time to talk all things dance because I think we would
Yes.
probably go on
That could
forever
be the
about that.
next
That'll be
podcast.
the
Dance
next
and
episode.
marketing. Yes.
Exactly. But I do want to ask you about dancing because I know for me,
Mhm.
dancing it's everything to me. I'm not dancing as much, but it's really built who I am. It's really built my career truly, even though it's in a kind of a different space. So I really want to understand, how has dancing helped you with your career in marketing?
Yeah, so I would think just in terms of the path, right? The journey that I took, I wouldn't be a vice president of marketing had I not taken the path that I took with the dance career, right? With the path that I took in terms of how I got into marketing. Had I not had that dance degree, I would not be where I'm at today. And I feel like when I think about the education that I got in my dance degree when I was in school, it all really applies to today's marketing, right? It's about being flexible and being scrappy and really thinking critically and thinking creatively. And that's all the things that you learn as a dancer. It's all the things that you learn as being an artist. And I think that's really a big part of just how I became the marketer that I am today, was because of the foundation that dance gave me.
One of my dance teachers, Eva Stone, told me, you have to be a salesman for your own shows. You can't just think you can make something look amazing and people will show up to your shows. You have to go out and get people out to your shows if you are a dancer. I wanted to know, what lessons did Maria learn in marketing for dance shows that translated to building an audience?
I think the biggest thing that really was successful for us, because I did a lot of projects where I was building things from the ground up with other fellow artists. So it was working with emerging companies, right? Not necessarily only working with the established companies that already had kind of a built-in audience. And I think the biggest thing that was something that we were able to kind of build an audience from the ground up was the brand, right? Establishing that, hey, we're legit. We've got a brand, we've got a mission, we've got a value proposition. So if you come out, you're going to have a really great experience. It's not just about sitting and watching dance. It's about experiencing the event that you're coming to. And I think establishing that from the beginning, that, the solid brand and what value we were bringing to the audience was how we were able to build our audience from the ground up.
How is something like that lesson specifically, whether that's experience of the brand, but even just like other lessons that you learned about audience building, how have you been able to kind of translate that from the dancing world to peer fit and kind of building your audience in a more corporate setting where it's not as, I guess artistic as like a dance show would be?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it goes back to that saying, like, hey, you can't be everything to everyone, right? We hear that all the time. And I feel like a lot of times when people don't know exactly who their audience is, start eliminating, start figuring out who is it that is probably not going to benefit from your product. I think that applies to the dance world, to the arts world, and to brands in the corporate world, right? You have to figure out who is probably not going to buy or benefit from your product, and you know what? Let's remove them. Let's not market to them because it's going to be a waste of time and money. And I think that's the first thing. That's the hard part, I think, about building a business is a lot of people think everyone's going to love your product, but you have to be realistic with yourself and say like, hey, it's not everyone's going to love everything that you do. So let's find the ones that are and really focus on them.
What are best practices to find your target audience? Because I think we see these bigger brands and we're like, yeah, that's what we want. We want to be able to reach all these people. But I mean, you're in a startup that's, I mean, definitely well on its way here. But even from the beginning, you were there. Like, how do you even find that target audience to start? And how do you really narrow it down before you can start to widen it? Because you really have to start pretty narrow just to get the first few adopters in.
I mean, I think at the beginning you have to figure out what your business model is, right? And what are you bringing to the table, and then compare that to what potential competitors are doing. So at the end of the day, you have to make a decision, hey, do I want to compete with that individual, or do I want to try and bring something different to the table? And if you decide to compete, well then that's easy. Just pick their audience and then you've got your audience. But if you're trying to bring something different to the table, then more than likely the audience that your competitors may be targeting maybe isn't your audience. So I think that's one way to figure out your audience. The other one is going to be just working with a lot of content creation and seeing how the response is, and then starting to, obviously there's tons of analytical tools out there to see who is really resonating with the content that you're putting out there. I think that will help you narrow down as well quite a bit.
Peerfit has become a very successful startup and is changing how corporate wellness and benefits work for employees. Before it became successful, there was a journey to find the right audience for them.
So for us, we started off as a D2C product way back in 2011. And then we pivoted when we joined an accelerator program. And someone said to us, hey, you guys would probably work better as a B2B solution. And we're like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool, because at the end of the day, that's where there's some really solid revenue and money potential, right? And at the end of the day, it really fed into our value proposition of, making fitness and wellness easy and accessible. And how easy would it be if you didn't have to pay for your own fitness, right? And so I think if when we started thinking about, who we wanted to target in terms of who's going to buy our product, we were thinking, let's go up to the top of the people who would want to invest in wellness to the individual. So at the end of the day, we're a B2B company, but we're kind of like B2B for C, because at the end of the day, we do have to target users as well once they get through that funnel. And so that's how we kind of determine that. And then our fitness partners, they're part of the product, right? So when we partner with fitness organizations, we're looking for people who are going to help really build the Peerfit brand as well. So we're looking for really great fitness partners that are going to provide a great experience to not only our clients but to their members and to their employees. And so we look at our fitness partners exactly like that. They're our partners in this journey. They're not necessarily a client or a net target audience because they're part of the product.
I'm curious because, you talked a lot about when you find your target audience, you work through a ton of content. And obviously, when you're direct to consumer, that is easy, right? You're trying to build a brand on Instagram and showing off the product and showing off, being in the studio. But B2B marketing is it's always kind of a little bit more interesting because you are marketing to specific people, whether that's like the HR person that's, in charge of corporate wellness, but it's still kind of a big conglomerate. So I'm curious how you guys are um, doing content creation when you are in the mindset of B2B, and how are you actually marketing your product when there's a few decision makers versus, massive amount, like trying to get a ton of consumers to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at the end of the day, when you think about social media, you still need to think of it as a B2B communication channel, right? Because that CEO is still someone who probably has a Facebook profile. So at the end of the day, you do still have to have a solid presence on those social media channels because you never know who's checking you out, or you never know who's going to come across your channel. And so we use social media quite a bit to reach our target audience, and each channel is defined by how we want to reach them. So of course, Instagram is going to be much more visual. It's where we showcase more of our fitness side, whereas LinkedIn is more of our B2B channel. We're trying to get to those HR and CEO type of individuals. So each channel has its own personality for sure, but we definitely use social media as a big part of our content creation. In addition to that, PR and just media in general is going to be huge, right? We want to be in those places where people are looking for the types of products that are going to help benefit their business. So communications and media is a big part of our strategy as well.
What does that look like specifically? What is a strategy behind that? And, is there a specific way that you're finding these places to have these, PR media relations, or what's the whole process and what's your strategy behind it for PeerFit?
I think a lot of people know PR is a huge investment of time, right? It's not something that you're going to see a quick return on in terms of outreach, but that's really what it is. Lots and lots of outreach, finding those journalists that are going to be the ones that are going to be interested in your product, and that's I think the hardest part, right? Because you might find a journalist that you connect with, and then they may move into another job a year later, so then you have to start the process all over again, right? And there's a ton of journalists out there, so it's really looking for the people that are writing about your industry and trying to establish that relationship with them, just reaching out and trying to get a connection without having to sell them anything in the beginning, but definitely trying to establish some kind of relationship, networking with them, so that when the day comes that you do want a story written, that you're top of mind.
Let's get practical with kind of this relationship building, because I think a lot of times I actually just wrote a post recently about how people are not social on social media, and so like how it's very much can be like, let's connect, and then they like sell you right away. How do you do that in a practical way? Like, how are you building these relationships? How are you finding these people? And how are you kind of nurturing it, saying like, hey, I'm from Peerfit, but I'm also not trying to sell you right now, but wink, wink, I'm gonna sell you probably in a few, maybe a few months from now.
I think when I think of a PR person or a communications person, even a content person, right? When you're trying to get to third party content creators, it's a sales position. right? That's when you have to put, as a marketer, you have to put your sales hat on. So you're doing things like connecting with them on LinkedIn, liking their posts, commenting on their posts, saying great job when they hit a milestone, right? So that you are establishing that relationship ahead of time, right? Sending them emails with little tidbits of content and information. Maybe it has nothing to do with Peerfit or your organization, but kind of supplying them with information that they can continue to find and educate themselves on the industry and be able to have that information. And then at that point, when you're ready and you've established that and established that rapport, then you can definitely figure out how to pitch them then at that point. But it's really close to I think what sales do. And it's even harder now with journalists because they don't want to meet you in person, right? It's tough for them to meet for coffee or set up an appointment because they're so busy. They're constantly churning out content. So, and you can't send them any care packages or swag or anything like that. So it's really about the establishment through these social channels on how to create those relationships. So that's why I say it's an investment. You gotta, when anyone says like, hey, we want to hire a PR agency or we want to hire an internal PR person, like be ready to open up the pockets because that's going to take time.
In episode 12 of How to Build an Audience, we had Ned Eric as a guest. In this interview, he talked about redefining a personal brand into a prospect brand. Does your reputation and what you are posting online and offline bring in leads? Since Peerfit is B2B, I wanted to understand how important is personal branding to team members to build Peerfit's customer base.
I think it's a huge part of the sales process, right? If you are an outbound salesperson or even an inbound lead gen person, right, you have to have some kind of validation, right? And they're going to want to see who, your prospects are going to want to see who do you connect with? Who are you connected with? How can that benefit our relationship by me connecting with you? So I think if you are in sales, if you're anyone on the C-suite team, right, anyone in the leadership team, you really need to be establishing the personal brand that is a good representation of the company brand overall. That is something that we definitely stress, and it's hard because it takes a lot of time. So as a startup, you know that you've got lots of cooks in the kitchen and lots of hands in different cookie jars. And so it's really difficult. I'll be the first one to say, like, I do not post all the time, nor probably even regularly, because the time is just really short for me. But it's definitely something that I think is very important. I find time to do stuff like this, like, podcasts. Heck yeah, sign me up. But I think in terms of, especially for our sales team, we definitely stress posting a lot on especially LinkedIn, because that's where they're going to see and find their prospects. And it is going to take time, but I think we've seen the payoff already. And so I think for us, it's just got to be something you have to keep up with.
You've obviously have been in startups, and I feel like dancing in some ways is a startup, right? Especially with what you are doing, because you're always creating new shows, always trying to like get new audiences and connect. And so there's probably a ton of wildfires that you're always trying to put out. And that's true with startups. You've been with Peerfit from pretty much almost the beginning, if not the beginning. And I want to know, like, what are some of the bigger successes that you have found over your time at Peerfit when it comes to building an audience around this company and around its mission?
Not because we don't want to, not because we can't, but because there's another opportunity here that a lot of people aren't looking into. We were one of the first companies to fully fund fitness through employers, right? And we're still one of the only companies who fully funds it, right? Most of the other our competitors out there do subsidized model where the employee still has to pay for part of it. And so we're really proud about that we really try and push for a fully funded model, because at the end of the day, we don't think the employee should be paying for any of their fitness, because at the end of the day, it should be the employer investing in the employee's wealth, right? Or the health. And so it's still something that we push today. And I think for us, that pivot was a huge part of our success. And when we started to see a really great growth trajectory, because we were getting companies and large health plan partners interested in offering something that they knew would benefit the member at the last member at the bottom, right? And that's the biggest part of it is when you think about scale, right? We went from going to just one-off employers, this employer, that employer, to working with a health employer to who is giving us hundreds of thousands of lives in one contract. And that to
Wow.
us, yeah, that to us was such a huge part of our growth because we knew we had found something that was really valuable and that at the end of the day, the member was still going to benefit, at the end of the day, even though we were bringing in this mass contract. So that was huge for us, I think.
After the break, Maria breaks down how Peerfit made this crazy transition from direct to consumer to business to business. This show is sponsored by Gatozi Collective. We are a marketing agency based in Austin, Texas that is a personal marketing team to many businesses. We create photo and video content delivered to you each month to save you time and a massive headache when you're planning your social media for the month. If planning's too much for you, we can also run your social media accounts to give you more time to grow your business. You can visit our website at www.gatozicollective.com. Now, let's get back to the show. It is amazing that Peerfit has still been able to help the end consumer with their health and wellness while being able to scale to hundreds of thousands of people. Many companies fear adapting their model of business and end up suffering because the product doesn't match the market. Repositioning yourself is never easy, and I know this firsthand with Gatozi Collective and how we've had to adapt over time. I wanted to know what it took for Peerfit to make their change.
We were so young when we did it, right? It was so early on. We didn't have that big of an audience just yet. So for us, when we were able to pivot, it was just a small wave, right? Like I feel like if other companies at different sizes, like if some of our competitors were to make this pivot, I feel like that would be a huge undertaking, right? But because we were so young when we made the pivot, for us, it was just almost like, hey, this is where we should have always been, right? It didn't seem like that big of an undertaking. And it just felt right. Like it felt like it was who we should have always been. But maybe at the time, we decided on D2C because that's just what you did, right? D2C, like you said, hey, D2C is easy, right? And it's the first thing everyone goes to. B2B is hard. And so I think a lot of people don't want to do B2B just because it is hard. And so I think for us, maybe it wasn't the first thought, but definitely when we did do the pivot, it just felt right. And so it was easier for us because we were so young and small at the time.
Having a smaller ship to steer is a lot easier than having, a massive cruise ship. It takes the angles are a little bit harder and it takes a lot longer to switch over your path. But what did it look like? What did you guys have to do practically to switch that? Like, were you guys having to rebrand, redo the website? Like, what did that process in terms of the tactical marketing stuff? How did that change for you? And maybe even how did that change your job specifically in terms of what you were trying to do? Because if you're going direct to consumer, you're not really trying to do as much LinkedIn. Probably you're probably doing more on Instagram or Facebook or running ads. So how did that change for you in terms of your marketing efforts and your job specifically?
We rebranded because that's what you do. Like I think everyone goes through, that ebb and flow of, okay, when is it time to rebrand? Especially when you're so young, you kind of make decisions early on that maybe aren't who you're going to be, right? So we rebranded, of course, because we became something different, right? We were a slightly different organization, and so we needed to rebrand in order to suit the new path that we were going down. And what's great about that rebrand is that it still holds true to this day. We rebranded, I would say, pretty early on, like 3 years ago almost, and it's still like I look at our goals today and our mission and value. I'm like, hey, that's still on point, right? Which is really great. That means we did the brand really well. And so that was definitely first part of that. However, I do want to put a footnote here. Do not rebrand just to rebrand because it's such a huge undertaking. That's the first thing I tell people is like, are you sure you want to rebrand? Are you sure you want to change the logo? Because once you do that, it's hard to go back, right? And it's such a huge undertaking. So we definitely did that. And it took us a good, I would say, 12 to 15 months to really kind of finalize the brand. And there are still times where I catch old logos hanging out there. So it's just such a big undertaking to rebrand. But we had to do it, right? Because we were shifting our business model, and we needed to have that different part of us to present. So definitely rebranded. Of course, we had to overhaul the website and completely it had to be B2B focused, right? So it had to change everything from the home pages to the lead gen to everything in that aspect to the marketing site. Luckily, the app itself, though, because the app is user focused, the app really just kind of stayed, the foundation was still there. So all we had to do was just continuously improve on the app. So a lot of it was really focused on just the marketing. Luckily, the product could still continue to grow naturally as it needed to. But I definitely think when you make that pivot, the first thing you need to think about is copy, right? Copy and content. How does that change from what you were saying before to what you're going to say now? And how is that going to resonate with your new audience?
I love talking about writing because it's been something that I've been learning a lot about and really, I mean, reading books, asking people about it. So I'm going off script here. I'm going to ask you about it because it's super important. But you did switch, right? You're going B2C, now you're going B2B, right? That is completely different audience. How do you build out great copy and know how to really reach your target audience? Like, what did it take practically to switch that writing, but even just switch the mindset, even with your content? Like, everything, all the writing, the small things. I think a lot of people forget that it's not just the writing on your website, it's every caption, it's every tweet, it's ev- even the going back to personal branding. It's how your employees talk about it. It's all so different. So, what's the process of switching your communication and the style and the voice? Like, what were the meetings like? And then how did you even communicate that to your employees? Like, hey guys, we are B2B now. This is the voice. This is how we want to talk. Like, how was that? How did that change? And so what were the conversations of that? But then also how did you communicate that to your company to also really take that on? Because that's a big switch for everybody, not just the brand itself, but for each employee.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the first things that we were doing as we were switching, of course, we were growing at the same time. So it was kind of easier to start to implement the new Peerfit because we were adding new team members as after we had already switched. So that was an easier, I think, transition for us. And then on top of that, we've always been a small marketing department, but um, one of the big things that I always say when we're hiring for someone in marketing is they've got to be able to write. So luckily for us, the person who leads most of our content and copy, Christina, she's been there for the company even longer than I have. She was able to really develop a really extensive tone and writing guide that was one of the first things we did before we had even finalized like our visual brand, right? And so we established the tone and the writing guide really early on. And that's the thing that we passed down to our sales team, to our client services team, to our, any new marketers that were coming on. It's like, hey, you need to read this before you do anything. And so that was something that we did really early on. That was the extent of many meetings, many strategy meetings, lots of back and forth, obviously in Google Docs and going back and forth on how we want to say, how do we want to sound, what's the tone that we want to use. And everything was written down, everything from when to use caps, a title case versus when to add periods to bulleted lists. Like we had everything written out. And I think you have to get that detailed so that there are no questions, right? When it comes to tone and content and copy and how we can all have a unified personality when you're using that.
You're a dancer, so we always talk about discipline, and you talked about being analytical, right? And, being in the studio, you're dancing all the time. You're trying to basically perfect each single move and movement that you're doing. How much is discipline and consistency a part of building an audience, especially in the beginning, like a startup like PureFit?
Yeah, I think when you're in a startup mode, I think there's a tendency for lots of startups to just say like, "Hey, throw it against the wall, see what sticks. We'll come back to it," right? And I feel like that is not always a great way to start thinking about marketing strategy, right? It's just like with dance, right? It's like unless you know you're Merce Cunningham, you're not going to go on stage and just improv, right? That's not what you do, right? You're going to be in a studio for hours and hours perfecting every dance move before you end up presenting it, even if you just present it for an hour, one show. And so I think the same thing has to apply to marketing. It's like you need to go and think of the high level strategy. What are the goals that you want to get out of it? What are the KPIs that you expect to get out of it? What's your hypothesis, right? That's the analytical side. What do you think is going to happen if you were to launch this strategy? And all of that has to happen really early on before you even press execute on anything, because you have to have that foundation there in place before you end up pushing it out, so that you can really have a good base on how to analyze and see what worked and what didn't work. But if you're just kind of throwing stuff out there, it's going to be kind of hard to pull that back once you do.
As successful as Maria and Peerfit have been overall, there are always times when the journey gets hard or a campaign fails.
I think there's a tendency to always think that, email marketing is going to be the thing that everyone needs to go to. So, I feel like when you think about email marketing and you don't see those results right away, we've sent out tons of emails where an open rate and click rate have been terrible. And then, of course, that does not equal conversions, right? Does that mean that that campaign is bad? No. So I think what you would think about from there is like, how can I redo this campaign to see if it produces another result? And I think that's the part of the testing and marketing that's really important, is after you see those analytics, like figuring out how to iterate on campaigns. But I would say pretty much every email that we send out is always an improvement of another email that we've sent out before, right? Until you get to a point where you're like, okay, this one's definitely not working. Let's just go ahead and toss it, right? And that is a big part of marketing too. It's like, if it's not working, it's a big part of dance. If it's not working, it's not flowing, you got to be able to just say like, hey, this one's dead in the water. Let's just go ahead and stop doing it. And so I think that's a big part of just, being able to really define and differentiate between what's working and what's not working. Don't just keep doing something because you've always done it. If the analytics aren't there, if the conversions aren't there, it's okay to push it to the back.
Although some campaigns can fail, one campaign for Peerfit was so great they even won an Emmy for their commercial. Yes, the Television Academy Emmys.
We were doing really, really well. We were like, you know what, guys, we've been doing a lot of video work, but it's been a lot of like sales and like talking head type stuff. We've got to grow up a little bit. We've got to do something that's going to show the growth and show where we're at as an organization, so that our partners and prospect partners see like, hey, this is the Peerfit, right? That I want to partner with, right? So we set out to do what we call a high production value video, right? AKA a commercial, right? And so the hope was that, yeah, we would love to push it out on TV, if that ended up being where we were going to do, but definitely we could atomize it and put it out on social for sure, and make sure it's, all on our YouTube channel, use it as a sales tool as well. But we just didn't know, what the end of the year would bring. This was, 2019 at the beginning of the year. We were like, let's create like a really great piece of video content that we can use over and over again, that really showcases who Peerfit is and what it is that we offer. And so we partnered with Diamond View, which is a local Tampa video agency. Highly recommend. They're amazing. And they helped us create this video. They really, put a lot of work into making sure that it was, who Peerfit wants to represent. They submitted the application for the Emmy without telling us. And then we found out we got nominated, which was awesome. And then we found out we won, which is even more awesome. So it just ended up being the result of lots of hard work that we put into at the beginning of the year. And we found out we won the Emmy in December. So, I mean, we're talking over 9 months of time that this video has been able to kind of live and breathe, and it's still seeing the light of day. So I always like to tell my COO and my CFO, like, hey, we got our money's worth on that video, by the way, right? Because we're still using it to this day, and it still has that great recognition. So the Emmy was definitely the nice, kind of sprinkles on top. So it was really great to be able to do that. And I did not know you could win Emmys like that. So
I didn't know either.
how many marketing people do you know have Emmys? So there you go.
I finish off the podcast with a segment called Open Mic. This is a chance for my guests to share anything they want. A lot of times, I feel like people get stuck behind the industry that they are in, but we are all human and have other interests outside of that. So this is a space for my guests to say whatever they want to say.
I think I'll leave with a piece of advice, which is be a chameleon, right? I think that's how I've been able to be so successful in my career. And, it's success for me for sure. I think I would have never thought that this is where I would end up being, coming out of, with a dance degree. But I think it's because I've always just been so just open to any types of roles and things that are thrown my way. I'm definitely the type of person that's like, hey, I don't know how to do that, but I'll definitely figure it out. And I think that's why I've been able to really kind of push forth and get to where I'm at today. So I think that is probably the piece of advice that I would leave for everyone today.
No journey in life or business is simple. There are a lot of twists and turns, and sometimes you have to change your course. Peerfit is a great example of how to have self-awareness in business, to know when to adapt to the market. It also helps when you have a strong leader like Maria who can weather any storm, even a massive rebrand. You can follow Maria on Twitter and check out Peerfit on Instagram. All the links to find Peerfit and Maria will be in the show notes. Thank you, Maria, for being on the show. If you like this show, tweet me at Matthew Gutozzi. And if you really love this show, drop a rating on Apple Podcasts or your podcast listening app, and I will talk to you next week.